and welcome to Got Clutter, Get Organized, the conversation. I am excited because we have Rebecca Casselman, and she is a military spouse, among other things, podcaster. She's a creative, and I'm excited about this conversation just to get her perspective on, the different types of moves she had to make, but also just in living an organized life, with her spouse and the kids. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So, before we get started into some of the questions, I just would like to know a little bit about you. You are a spouse, a mother, but you're also creative and a podcaster. And just talk a little bit about that journey. Like, what came first?
Um, well, I've always been a creative person. I like to figure out how things work. I am a DIY addict, a do-it-yourselfer. I think a lot of people who are from Alaska are that way because we have a sense of survival that's kind of baked into our upbringing. And Yeah, I mean, I became a military spouse when I was 20 years old, and so that creative spark that's always been within me, I just kind of brought to that. I learned how to sew by putting together a flower girl dress for my wedding day for my little sister. So that kind of just learn it as you go. It's sort of been just my whole upbringing and my lifestyle, and then I kind of brought that with me into my um, career, and then also me being a military spouse and also being a parent. I just kind of bring that with me everywhere I go.
Mm. So, in regards to because you have moved several times, and also you just have other aspects of your life, like the creative part, you have to, pack that up everywhere you go, and the kid stuff. And so, what are some of the things that maybe in your experience or you've seen in regards to just the organized living that sometimes people may not get? In regards, it could be just moving, it could just be really being in the mindset that, hey, I'm here now, but maybe in a few years I might be relocating. So, what are some of the things that you've seen or experienced?
Um, so in the role of being a military spouse, I think you get kind of stuck in a mind frame that things are very temporary. You're going to move and settle in somewhere, but you make friends and it's quick. You don't talk about the weather. You talk about real life things, but because you know it's fleeting and you have only so much time. Um, and it can be difficult when you move somewhere that doesn't have a lot of military people because they don't understand why you're so direct, and how much you need that community, how much you crave that. And that's kind of one of the reasons we made a podcast ourselves, and me being creative was because of the 2020 shutdowns, needing community and being in a new base. I thought, well, my DIY, I could do that. I could make a podcast, because we needed that community. And then as restrictions lifted, we got to kind of build that community. Our last duty station, and then I shared that, and some people started listening to our show, and it's kind of grown from there. But I've noticed, I think every time we move, to a new city or a new town, I can get very overwhelmed with the chaos, the stress that comes with disorganization, and a lot of decision fatigue can follow with that, because that disorganization will create this void of like an unknown, a lot of unknowns. And the bigger that void is, I think the higher the stress and the higher those cortisol levels. Um, I think a specific time, I think I can share a story. We were PCSing, which is a permanent duty station change. Um, and two movers came to our house to pack up everything. And we had told them, we'd filled out paperwork that this is a family of five and we have a piano, and only two movers showed up. um, so that created, of course, a lot of stress. And you have to be out of a house, a military house, at a certain time because somebody else is already lined up to move in. There's no flexibility or wiggle room there. So it was a very stressful time for us as a family. And then a lot of times you'll get to a new station, a duty station, and you have orders to move. And you have to be out at a certain time and you have to arrive at a certain time. You get there and there's not a house for you. So it's it can be alarming, but it's common. It's a very common thing, and you would think, oh, everything's so organized in military lifestyle. Everything's very precise, but it's not. So you'll show up. There's not a house for you. You stay in temporary living for a while. And there's been a couple times where we have signed a lease for a military house that was smaller than what we thought, had less bedrooms for a family of five that we had originally thought we were going to have. So does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. And actually, it gives us like a kind of look into the life as a military family and
Mhm,
military spouses because you think, okay, you're going to move to wherever they assign you to. So everything's already set up. But like you said, you have to kind of navigate that. And even something as simple as just like the movers, you got a piano and your family of five. So
mhm,
we need a little bit more people. So really how having to really kind of navigate. And then also when you said decision fatigue, just
mhm.
all the decisions you have to make. So how have you been able to navigate that? Because now you've got, years of experience of being the spouse and the mom. And of course, now you're a podcaster. So how do you navigate that so possibly you don't have the decision fatigue or that maybe you just don't get too overwhelmed with everything going on?
Right. I mean, everybody knows that phrase, it takes a village. So it's really helpful if you have other people that can help maybe take the kids, for a few hours while you're trying to you have to be present when the mover's there. So while you're trying to follow the checklist with the movers and you have to number all the boxes. So they have a checklist when you move. So you're not doing everything yourself. That is beneficial. And dividing those tasks between your spouse and yourself if they're there, if they're not deployed, because spouses will move while their active duty service member is deployed, and you are the one who is in charge of that. Um, Following the checklist helps a lot. Asking them hard questions, asking them again if you don't understand, and being okay with that instead of thinking, well, I can do everything on my own, which sometimes has the mindset as a military spouse because you have to do a lot of things on your own and you carry the whole world on your shoulders. But asking for help and assistance is a big one, I think, and following the checklist as closely as you can, and really reaching out.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
that's like, I think in real life as well, when you do have to make a move, having a
Hmm.
checklist, but also asking the hard questions, as well as making sure that your spouse is involved if they can be, or
Hmm.
excuse me, if you are single, then like you said, create that village because I've been thinking, I'm like, okay, I want to move in the future. I do use movers, but then
Hmm.
people have asked to help, and of course, it's like, well, and then I started to say, oh no, I don't, but then I'm like, well, wait a minute, they
Hmm.
can help me because I do have a lot of plans, Rebecca. I won't tell you how many, but I do have a lot of plans, and I'm like, you know what, they can help me transport my plans. So just little things just to kind of
Hmm.
get me settled in. Because, like you said, there's a community of people and they really truly want to help you. So make
Hmm.
that transition. So I want to learn more about your podcast because this is something you started just to kind of really stay connected and develop community. But I know it's grown.
Yes, it's grown a little bit. It's international now, which we were surprised because in the shutdowns it was just my husband and I having conversations, you know. But then we saw that it started to spread and there's people listening all over the world now. And it's a little flattering. We're kind of honored that people would tune in. It's called Candy from Strangers, and we just share sweet little nuggets to kind of help us and others muddle through this crazy life. We're hoping to expand and start doing interviews this year. I mean, our conversations are great, but it's still my spouse and I. It's just us. So we want to have some interviews and start having guests on. I think this year that was a goal that I had
Hmm.
set once
Hmm.
we settle into our new home because we have just moved into a new home. we've been
Ah,
in,
yes,
we've been here about 5 months, so
okay,
I still have some
okay.
boxes, but I'm giving myself grace and time instead of rushing into it. Mhm.
And I think that's important because I think sometimes when we move, we feel like we've got to have everything set up that by the next weekend. And you're
Mhm.
right, you have to give yourself time. You have to
Mhm.
give yourself grace. So, Rebecca, is there like a tip or strategy that you can share with someone who, maybe even facing, decision fatigue, or right now they're like, oh gosh, Rebecca sounds like she's got it together and I'm ready to move and I think I'm going to scream. So, do you have any strategies
I
or
had a I
tips?
had a several tips I had thought of.
Okay.
But for me as a military spouse, like tips for living life a little bit organized is not just to make things look pretty, but is to create stability. And that foundational stability in this life is very unstable. You know, we don't know when somebody's getting deployed. We don't know when our next, move will be. It can get you sideways sometimes. But one my big tip is very basic and it's kind of old school. It's a filing cabinet and having folders for my insurance, dental insurance, life insurance. God forbid the Red Cross calls you. You know, I've had that happen to me, but in a stressful situation like that, that is such a blessing to have everything sort of organized, and it's great for you or your family. These folders for retirement accounts, your taxes, kids. My personal one lifesaver that I love is a hanging file folder, and inside of it are different little bifolders for each
Okay.
child. Okay. Um, they have their current school enrollment information because that changes every few years, shot records, birth certificates, because those are required every time we move. Plus, I add three little folders and they're labeled K through 5, middle school, and high school. And in that, I
Okay.
keep special artwork, awards, milestones, things like that, that they've earned. Um, and sometimes we'll display things, but then it gets chucked. You know, we can't keep that. We can't have clutter. Because when you move as a military family, you are allowed a certain weight limit of household goods, and the military will cover that. But if you go over that weight limit, you pay out of pocket. So we keep things pretty light. I don't have a lot of trinkets, neither do the children. But I do allow them also each child will have they have a bulletin board in their bedroom, and that's where they can display their artwork or whatever their favorite thing is. And when it gets full, it's up to them to make the choice what to keep and what to get rid of. So I am not the villain throwing away their favorite artwork they just came home with. They can choose what to keep and what to get rid of because it's only a certain space, right? So that's a little tip. It's a family kind of a
Mm-hmm.
mommy tip, but
But you've
it
given
helps
a
keep it.
lot of I mean, you gave a lot. For example, just your tip about how you learn how to really live with what is necessary, because if you go over a certain weight, then of course, that's going to be extra out of your pocket. And it's like a mindset like, hey, this is really all I need to live. And even you teaching the children what they can, and it's their decision on what to keep and what to let go of. So,
Mhm.
that as well. And of course, I love it when I hear people, yes, I've got my paperwork organized, because sometimes you just never know when you get a call and they're like, well, you need this. Like yesterday, I got a call, my doctor's retiring. Well, after I panic, I was like, oh, really? And then, and I said, well, when? She's like, well, in the next 30 days. And I'm like, okay.
Oh my
So then I
goodness.
had yeah, so then I had to go into motion. I'm like, okay, what do I do? Because it's been a long time. I mean, she's been my doctor for 20 years. But it's like having those things organized. It kind of like, okay, I'm not going to get
Yeah.
overwhelmed. I can do this a bit at a time. So
Well,
those are some really great tips that you gave.
yeah.
Some really
And
great
everywhere
strategy.
we go, we have to have a new PCM. We get a new doctor, a new pediatrician. And so finding people that take our insurance is a big deal. And then they
Yeah.
always start over. What are you allergic to? What are So you have to have all of that documented.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I know. I understand, Rebecca, because I've got that last little sheet that they printed out when I went to the doctor. So I'm going to take it to the new doctor. I'm like, okay, this is the last thing. So, yeah, this has been a really great conversation, Rebecca. So, how can listeners connect with you?
Oh, I'm mostly on Instagram. That's a public platform that I use most, and
Okay.
people can engage with me there. That's just at Rebecca.Casselman, Casselman. And yeah, we can, I'll answer messages sometimes, and then they can kind of look and just see kind of what I'm about there.
And of course, listeners, as you know, and of course, those of you watching, I will have a link so you can connect with Rebecca on Instagram. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. It is so greatly appreciated.
Thank you for having me.